Welcome to our presentation on project requirements and legal frameworks that impact upon corporate social responsibilities and governance requirements. We've been researching the Wembley Stadium rebuild project as it's a project that has occurred in all of our lives and it's one that we've all seen the benefits of. So I'll just give you a quick overview of the topics that we'll be covering in this presentation. We'll be looking at the background of the project and its stakeholders, the governance frameworks, the legislative frameworks and examples such as the Health and Safety at Work Act, which was introduced in 1974, the Environmental Protection Act, which was introduced in 1990, the Climate Change Act, which was introduced in 2008, and the Building Act, which was introduced in 1984. We'll also be taking a look at corporate social responsibility and CSR from the project's perspective. We'll also, throughout the presentation, we'll be looking at Wembley's current and future efforts to maintain their CSR. So I'll just give you a quick background on the project as well. Wembley Stadium, it's a football stadium that was opened in 2007 to replace the original Wembley Stadium. The old one was a lot smaller and the new one's it's got a lot more features. It's currently the largest stadium in the UK and also the second largest in Europe. It's got 90,000 seats. I think at one point it had 98,000 people in for, I think it was a Adele concert. It was designed by Populus and Foster, who they had the idea to crown the stadium with the big 134-metre high arch, which sort of makes it stand out from a lot of other stadiums. And it was also built by the Australian firm Multiplex. So the original contract was for 798 million, but in today's money that's about 1.2 billion. So if we're just looking at the construction of Wembley Stadium, just another bit of background. Wembley Stadium is a notoriously poorly project managed project. A lot of you may know that it's quite famous for having a lot of setbacks and it's just not a great project. But right from the get-go, the demolition of the old Wembley Stadium was meant to be completed around Christmas 2000. But that was delayed until 2002 because of financial and legal difficulties. But once work actually got started, that was around the early 2000s, there were still lots of setbacks, lots of sort of like health and safety problems and stuff going wrong. And they never really got a final finish date for the project. But overall the project was finished on the 19th of May 2007. So I mentioned before that the project it's had a lot of problems, it had a lot of delays. There were lots of obstacles and litigations throughout its life, but the thing about this is, because of these delays, Multiplex tried to cut corners to speed up and reach the end date quicker. So they ignored legislation and they ignored their sort of corporate social responsibility to try and reach the end date quicker. And because of this, things like health and safety just went out the window. And one sort of famous incident, I think this is what the project is mainly known for when it comes to things that went wrong. A guy, I think he was a father of two, he ended up dying on site. And one, that just looks bad for the project owners, so that Multiplex, that they've got a bad sort of reputation now. But they were also fined 150,000 for health and safety violations. So as we know, the Wembley Stadium that's been built now, it was a lot bigger than the old Wembley Stadium that they knocked down. And just to give you an idea of sort of the size of this project, at the peak of the construction phase, there were more than 3,500 workers on site at one time. The stadium sort of is a lot bigger now, so it's got a circumference of 1 kilometre. It also contains 2,618 toilets, so you can think there's a lot of stuff that can go wrong there if you're thinking about corporate social responsibility. There's 4,000 separate piles that form the foundations of the stadium, and the deepest one of them is 35 metres. There's also 56-kilometre heavy power lines in the stadium, so you can think about the health and safety risks of them. There's 90,000 metres cubed of concrete and 23,000 tonnes of steel that have been used in the construction of the new stadium, which again, it gets me thinking about health and safety. There's a lot of stuff that you need to think about legislation wise when you're moving all that stuff. The total length of the escalators in the stadium is 400 meters, and the arch that sort of goes across the stadium and sort of supports the roof. The cross sectional diameter of that is greater than a Eurostar train that goes across the channel.
So this slide talks about the requirements for the project. So the idea for making the new stadium and demolishing the last one was to, for starters, hold a larger capacity. This will aid people to come in and watch the large and historic sporting events that are going to be held there and have been held there. But not only that, but it's also sustainability focused. Focusing on things like the climate, biodiversity, taking into consideration the amount of waste that they are producing, and ideally not contributing to any more pollution once it had been completed.
Before we can speak about governance, we must first establish what governance actually is. As defined by the APM, governance is the framework of authority and accountability that defines and controls the outputs, outcomes, and benefits from projects, programs, and portfolios. But what does this mean? In short, governance is required to ensure that there is a clear line of authority for the project and that people can be held accountable for their actions through defined escalation routes. Next, we will be looking at the project's governance structure and what it is. As described on the My Management Guide website, the project governance structure is the project management framework that includes a number of committees and their roles with agreed responsibilities and decision-making rules. In order to have good governance, a robust governance structure must be first established. Included in the project governance structure will be the stakeholders, the project sponsors, which will be looking at the strategic direction, the steering committee, which will be looking at operational direction, the project management office, which will also be looking at operational direction, and the project manager, which will be looking at the tactical direction. Meetings will be held between these key stakeholders to allow for the project to be governed effectively. Now that I have explained what governance is and looked at the structure in which it operates in, we will now look at what the positives and negatives are for creating a strong governance structure. Firstly, let's start off with the positives. Creating a strong governance structure will create a good stakeholder engagement. It will also increase your relationship with your stakeholders. Governance is a fair process, and governance helps to build perspective on the project. Some of the negatives may be establishing a strong governance structure can be very expensive for the business. It is a very intrusive process. It can be very time costing to get set up and get going, and it requires a lot of maintenance and extra resource.
So this slide shows a power interest grid. So it shows the different groups of stakeholders that are involved in the project, how much power they hold, how much interest they have in the project, to allow the project board and the project team to decide, the thoughts and opinions that need to be taken into consideration. So first of all, there's the local community, which we put in between keep satisfied and manage closely. Now, the reason for this being there may be some people that are against the project going ahead, but there also may be some people that are for it going ahead because it isn't a new build that's going on. It is demolishing something that was previously there and improving it. We kind of decided to put that in the middle. Next of all, we have the Football Association, so the FA. Now, they have contributed quite a lot to the project going ahead, and also they are the governing body of the football sport in the UK, and that is the place where all England's national football games will be held. Nextly, there's the Department of Culture, Media and Sport, who have donated £20 million to the project to boost the economy in the Wembley area. There is also the Sport England team. So they bought the old Wembley Stadium with a £120 million lottery grant, which allowed this project to go ahead, as if they didn't own the old stadium, they wouldn't be able to. And also the London Development Agency. So all of these that we put had a really high interest in the project, as it will be a significant landmark in sporting events, charity events, and will also bring a lot of opportunity to the area as well.
Corporate social responsibility, it's also shortened as CSR, and referred to as corporate citizenship. It's basically, in its shortest form, it's a business model that stops projects and businesses and companies and everything from performing morally reprehensible practices. So some businesses that practice CSR might look at reducing their carbon footprints or improving their labour policies or participating in fair trade. I know a couple of companies focus on CSR through charitable giving and sort of volunteering in the community that they've built their projects in. Earlier I touched on Multiplex's attitude towards CSR, and throughout the construction phase there wasn't much of it going on. There was a lot of constant rework that was happening, which sort of shows that they weren't interested in keeping it eco-friendly with all sort of like the raw materials that they'd be using on a project of that size. There were multiple health and safety breaches, which sort of proves to me that they weren't taking that initiative to look after their workers and create a safe working environment for them. I also found that the contract procurement process was unfair. So the people that wanted to build Wembley, they basically did a lot of under the table deals, and they just gave it to Multiplex. They gave the contract to Multiplex rather than bidding on it fairly. And it was also partially public funded through lottery funds, and a significant amount of that money was lost through rework. And a lot of people disagreed with the fact that they weren't spending the money in a responsible way. So the construction phase didn't have a lot of CSR going on. However, since it's been completed, the attitude towards CSR has really improved. They've developed an event sustainability management system, which covers things such as energy, water, food, transport, community, procurement, commercial partnerships, well-being, training and culture. And just to list a few of these things, they've achieved a zero waste to landfill status, which happened in 2010. They're now looking at putting electric vehicle charging points in. Also, they were giving back to the community by taking the soil from the old stadium and donating it to local parks. And 27,000 event tickets have been donated to community groups, so people that are less fortunate can sort of go to these events and sort of still have a good time. So doing all this has sort of given them the prestigious ISO 20121 certification, which basically proves to everyone that they have good CSR, and it's very well appreciated in the project industry.
We will now cover what legislation is and discuss the effects that it has had on Wembley Stadium. Legislation is defined as a law or set of laws suggested by a government and made official by a parliament. There are several pieces of legislation that have affected the construction of Wembley Stadium, as well as the current operation of the stadium. I will go on to define what these pieces of legislation do and how they have affected the corporate social responsibility of those involved in its construction and operation. The first piece of legislation that has had an impact on Wembley Stadium is the Health and Safety at Work Act. The Health and Safety at Work Act is the primary piece of legislation covering occupational health and safety in this country. It aims to protect the health, safety and welfare of employees by ensuring that employers follow four main rules. Employers must provide systems of work that are safe and without risks to health. The Act also states that employers must make arrangements to reduce the health risks of dealing with substances and materials at work. Employers must provide health and safety training to their employees, and they are also required to maintain a working environment that is safe for all of their employees. The Health and Safety at Work Act has had an impact on the corporate social responsibility of two companies involved in the construction of Wembley Stadium for both good and bad reasons. PC Harrington Contractors, a firm involved in the construction of Wembley Stadium, admitted that they breached health and safety regulations after they were investigated by the Health and Safety Executive following a serious incident. A rope that was attached to a skip carrying concrete snagged on a scaffolding platform, which caused the platform to fall, fatally injuring Patrick O'Sullivan and seriously injuring Martin Carroll. Failing to ensure the safety of their employees and meet the requirements of the Health and Safety at Work Act had a serious impact on the corporate social responsibility of the firm, and thus the reputation of the whole Wembley project was damaged. Strict rules are enforced by the Act to ensure that companies are socially responsible with the welfare of their employees. By failing to follow the health and safety rules, PC Harrington Contractors failed to demonstrate corporate social responsibility. In another instance during the construction of Wembley Stadium, the rules that are enforced by the Health and Safety at Work Act were followed by Multiplex, and the company therefore demonstrated corporate social responsibility. A steel rafter in the roof fell as it was being welded. In response to this incident, Multiplex evacuated the whole site and carried out an investigation into the cause of the issue and the resulting damage. All employees were paid in full whilst the investigation was taking place. Sacrificing time and money to investigate this health and safety issue demonstrated the corporate social responsibility of Multiplex. The evacuation and investigation complied with the law in the Health and Safety Act that states that employers must maintain a safe working environment for their employees. The firm could have continued working on the stadium in this time to continue progress, but this would have breached the health and safety regulations and negatively impacted the corporate social responsibility of Multiplex and the Wembley project as a whole. The second piece of legislation that has had an impact on Wembley Stadium is the Environmental Protection Act. It is currently having an impact on the operation of the stadium. The Act aims to prohibit the unauthorised or harmful deposit, treatment and disposal of waste. It does this by enforcing rules that prevent people from depositing waste on land without a permit. It also prevents people from treating, keeping or disposing of waste in a manner that can cause pollution or harm to human health. The Environmental Protection Act has an impact on the corporate social responsibility of the FA and the Wembley National Stadium Group. To comply with the rules that are set out in the Environmental Protection Act, Wembley has placed a significant focus on their waste management processes. Wembley has operated a zero waste to landfill policy since 2010, meaning they are sustainably disposing of their waste in a manner that doesn't harm the environment or contribute to pollution. In doing so, they have managed to protect the health of people in society and demonstrate corporate social responsibility. Wembley has also committed to a recycling scheme that currently sees them recycle 86% of all of their waste. They achieve this through collaboration with Veolia, who provide them with several services to assist in their recycling program. They train all of their employees on how to recycle properly. They provide specialized recycling equipment. They design their processes to allow for easy recycling, and they only procure materials that are recyclable. In addition to this, single-use plastics have been minimized in the stadium, and reusable cups are now offered to cut down on harmful waste even further. By focusing so heavily on recycling, Wembley has ensured that they comply with the rules set out by the Environmental Protection Act. The resulting sustainability has lowered pollution and protected people's health, which has allowed Wembley to demonstrate corporate social responsibility. The third piece of legislation that has had an impact on Wembley Stadium is the Climate Change Act. It is currently having an impact on the operation of the stadium. The Climate Change Act aims to implement measures that reduce the net carbon emission of this country. The target of the government is to reduce the carbon emissions by at least 100% in comparison to the baseline that was set in 1990. The Climate Change Act also has an impact on the corporate social responsibility of the FA and the Wembley National Stadium Group. To commit to the target that has been set by the government, Wembley Stadium have been taking measures to reduce the amount of pollution that they cause. Reducing their energy consumption by installing efficient LED lights across the stadium has resulted in less greenhouse gases needing to be used to generate the required electricity. Wembley has also encouraged those who are travelling to the stadium to do so by bicycle. By doing this, Wembley have made efforts to reduce the amount of pollution produced by cars that come to the stadium. Less pollution from vehicles will aid the government in their aims to reduce the carbon footprint of this country. Another measure that has been introduced to help the carbon target be met is electric charging points in the car parks. This has encouraged the use of electric vehicles when travelling to the stadium to further reduce the amount of carbon that is released into the atmosphere. Following the targets of the government that are set out in the Climate Change Act, possibly at the expense of profits, shows the commitment of Wembley to combating climate change. This demonstrates corporate social responsibility. If the government's commitment to combating climate change was ignored by Wembley Stadium to make more money, then those in charge would be perceived badly by the public as an irresponsible company.
So, the Building Act of 1984 is a United Kingdom statute consolidating previous legislation concerning the construction process and the design and specifications for buildings and their component parts and related matters in England and Wales. So, this act works to secure health and safety, well-being and convenience amongst any stakeholders in a construction project. It also empowers and obliges local authorities to enforce the building regulations in their areas. So this covers things like making sure that the area is boarded off when there aren't staff members there, and making sure that it is safe for the staff members that are working on there. But it also allows them to enforce laws and legislations to an extent of things like trespassing, criminal damage, if any damage is to occur in the property. And also the Act sets the legal status of approved documentation, meaning that the documents that are signed to approve of the project to let it go ahead are there, they're in final. It shows all the information that it needs to show. So to summarise this presentation, we've done a bit of a summary slide just to cover what we've been over. So first of all, we've learned that stakeholder management is incredibly important during any life cycle of any project. It is the process by which you organise, monitor and improve your relationships with your stakeholders, and also it means that they're able to be kept in the loop and that there's plans in place to keep them in the loop as well. We've also looked at stakeholders having different levels of interest and power. So, for example, you may get some companies or some stakeholders, should I say, that invest highly in the project. They are the project sponsor or the customer. And these will have higher levels of power and interest over people such as the local community, as they don't really have any input in the project, but they are still a stakeholder as it does affect them. There are also a number of rules and regulations which should be followed. This will allow the project to be carried out ethically and also mean that there's no risk of the project being shut down or closed or scrapped due to any legal issues. And last of all, corporate social responsibility. So it refers to the efforts made by a company to improve society and contribute towards sustainable development. So this means that the project was able to be carried out sustainably, the outputs are also still sustainable, and it has improved the society around them as well with the donations and contributions that they've had from different stakeholders.